April 23, 1945. The skies over northern Italy had cleared after 3 days of relentless rain, revealing the snow-capped Alps to the north and the muddy valley of the Po River below. First Lieutenant Marcus Jefferson, of the 332nd Fighter Group, checked his P-51 Mustang's fuel gauge as he patrolled at 22,000 feet, utterly unaware that in less than 1 hour he would accidentally stumble upon a desperate German column and change the course of an entire campaign. The German commander below, Oberst Werner Heidelmann, was equally confident that his carefully disguised troop movements would remain undetected by Allied air reconnaissance for at least another day. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable tale of how a single African-American pilot's ingenious improvisation and understanding of psychological warfare would not only overcome years of institutional discrimination, but would ultimately save thousands of lives on both sides and accelerate the Allied advance in the final days of the European theater. Marcus Jefferson adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the terrain below. His squadron had been assigned a routine reconnaissance mission over the Po Valley, where German forces were attempting to withdraw northward after the Allied spring offensive had broken through their defenses. The 22nd Army Group, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, was desperately trying to establish new defensive positions along the Alpine passes, hoping to delay the Allied advance long enough for a negotiated surrender rather than an unconditional one. Blue Leader to Blue 2 and 3, maintain formation and continue sweep eastward, Jefferson said into his radio. His wingmen, 2nd Lieutenant Richard Townsend and Flight Officer James Watkins, acknowledged his order with brief clicks on their radio transmitters. All 3 men belonged to the 332nd Fighter Group, better known as the Tuskegee Airmen, the only African-American fighter pilots in the United States Army Air Forces during World War II. The 332nd had earned a distinguished combat record, despite the prejudice they faced both at home and within the military. By this point in the war, they had completed more than 15,000 sorties and destroyed or damaged more than 400 German aircraft. Their distinctive red-tailed P-51 Mustangs had become respected and feared by German pilots who called them Schwarze Vogelmännchen, the Black Birdmen. Jefferson had joined the unit in 1944 after completing his training at Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. He had grown up in Philadelphia, the son of a postal worker and a school teacher. He had attended Howard University for 2 years before the war, studying electrical engineering before volunteering for pilot training. His technical background and quick mind had served him well as a pilot, and he had already been credited with destroying 3 enemy aircraft in aerial combat. Blue 2 to Blue Leader, I'm seeing something unusual at 2 o'clock low, approximately 10 miles. Townsend's voice crackled over the radio. Looks like vehicle movement along that secondary road heading toward the mountain pass. Jefferson banked his aircraft slightly to get a better view. Through breaks in the clouds, he could make out what appeared to be a long column of vehicles moving slowly along a winding road that led from the valley floor toward the foothills of the Alps. He reduced his altitude to 15,000 feet for a better look. I see it, Blue 2. Let's take a closer look, but maintain altitude for now. Blue 3, stay high and keep watch for enemy aircraft. As they circled, the details became clearer. It was indeed a German column, and a substantial one. Jefferson estimated at least 200 vehicles, including tanks, half-tracks, artillery pieces, and supply trucks. This wasn't just a tactical withdrawal. This was an entire battle group attempting to escape the Allied advance. What Jefferson didn't know was that he had stumbled upon Kampfgruppe Heidelmann, a composite force commanded by Oberst Werner Heidelmann, a veteran officer who had fought on both the Eastern and Western fronts. Heidelmann had been tasked with delaying the American advance long enough for other German units to establish defensive positions further north. His force included elements of the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division, the 98th Infantry Division, and various support units, approximately 4,000 men and 220 vehicles in total. Heidelmann was 52 years old, a career officer who had served in the First World War as a young lieutenant. Unlike many of his colleagues, He was not a National Socialist Party member and had private reservations about the German leadership. But he was a professional soldier who believed in doing his duty, even as the war was clearly lost. He had been wounded twice on the Russian front before being transferred to Italy in 1944. That morning, Heidelmann had been reviewing maps in the lead vehicle of his convoy when the news came that Allied aircraft might be in the area. He had immediately ordered the column to seek whatever cover was available and to maintain strict radio silence. The retreat had already been delayed by 3 days due to heavy rain and muddy roads. Fuel was critically low, and morale was deteriorating. The last thing he needed was an Allied air attack. "Herr Oberst, aircraft spotted at high altitude," reported his aide, Hauptmann Karl Fischer. "American fighters, it looks like." Heidelmann stepped outside the command half-track and looked up, shielding his eyes against the sun. He could just make out the distant shapes of fighter aircraft circling above them. "Are they attacking?" "Not yet, sir. They appear to be observing." Heidelmann considered his options. His column was strung out over almost 7 kilometers of winding road, much of it exposed with little natural cover. If the American fighters called in bombers or attack aircraft, the results would be devastating. Yet he couldn't disperse his forces, not in this terrain, and not with his current fuel situation. "Maintain radio silence," he ordered, "and continue movement at best possible speed. Perhaps we'll be lucky." Back in his cockpit, Jefferson was making quick calculations. This German force was significant enough to warrant immediate attention. Standard procedure would be to report the sighting to headquarters and request bomber or ground attack aircraft to interdict the column. But Jefferson knew that would take time, perhaps hours, during which the German force might reach the more defensible mountain passes. "Blue leader to blue 2 and 3. I'm going to make a pass over the column to get a better assessment. You two maintain altitude and cover me." "Roger that, blue leader," Townsend responded. Jefferson pushed his control stick forward and began a shallow dive toward the German column. As he descended, he could see frantic activity below, as German soldiers scattered from the road and took up defensive positions. A few flashes of light indicated anti-aircraft fire starting up, but he remained well above their effective range. He leveled off at about 5,000 feet, low enough to get a good look at the column but high enough to avoid most ground fire. What he saw confirmed his initial assessment. This was indeed a substantial force with significant combat capability. But he also noticed signs of a force under strain. Vehicles were spaced irregularly, some appeared to be under tow, and the column's pace was sluggish. As he completed his pass and began climbing back to rejoin his wingmen, an idea began to form in Jefferson's mind. It was unorthodox and against protocol, but if it worked, it could save both Allied and German lives while accelerating the Italian campaign's conclusion. The key insight came from his pre-war studies in electrical engineering and his knowledge of radio communication. Jefferson was aware that German forces monitored Allied radio frequencies, just as Allied forces monitored theirs. What if he could use that to his advantage? Rejoining his flight at altitude, Jefferson shared his observations, but not yet his plan. "That's a substantial force down there, at least a reinforced regiment with armor support. They're heading for the Alpine passes, probably trying to establish blocking positions to slow our advance. Should we call it in?" Watkins asked. "Yes, but I want to try something first," Jefferson replied. "Follow my lead and play along with anything you hear me say on the radio, but maintain your positions." Jefferson switched his radio to the general command frequency used for air-to-ground coordination, a frequency he knew would be monitored by German intelligence units. He took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to do was unconventional and possibly against regulations. But warfare often rewarded initiative and creative thinking. "Thunderbird Actual, this is Blue Leader. Do you copy? Over." There was no such unit as Thunderbird Actual. Jefferson was creating a fictional call sign. After a pause, he continued as if receiving a response. "Roger, Thunderbird Actual. We have visual confirmation on enemy column. Grid coordinates Mike Romeo 579421. Estimate 200 plus vehicles including heavy armor. Column extending approximately 7 kilometers along Mountain Road." He paused again, then continued. "Understood, Thunderbird. We'll maintain observation until your arrival. Be advised, we count at least 50 tanks and heavy assault guns in the convoy. Please confirm time to target for the bomber groups. Roger, 20 minutes for the first wave, additional waves at 5-minute intervals. We'll designate targets with smoke. Blue leader out. In the German command half-track, a signals officer burst in with an urgent report. Herr Oberst, American radio intercept. They've spotted us and are calling in bomber groups, multiple waves. First arrival in approximately 20 minutes. Heidelmann felt his stomach tighten. This was exactly what he had feared. His force was completely vulnerable on the exposed mountain road. If American heavy bombers hit his column, the losses would be catastrophic, and there would be no possibility of establishing the defensive line he had been ordered to create. "Are you certain of this intercept?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Clear transmission. They were calling in coordinates that match our position exactly. They mentioned 50 tanks. That's close to our actual strength." Heidelmann stepped outside again and looked up. The 3 American fighters were still circling high above. Soon they would be joined by bombers and his command would be devastated. He had to make a decision quickly. "Order the column to disperse immediately," he commanded. "All vehicles to seek whatever cover they can find. Priority to the fuel trucks and artillery units." "Sir," his operations officer interjected, "if we disperse now, regrouping will be extremely difficult, especially with our fuel situation." "If we stay on this road, there won't be anything left to regroup," Heidelmann replied grimly. "Get the orders out now, and use messengers, not radio. We don't want to confirm our position by breaking radio silence." The dispersal orders were passed down the column by motorcycle messengers. Vehicles began pulling off the road wherever possible, seeking cover under trees, in small ravines, or against hillsides. The process was chaotic, with some vehicles becoming stuck in the soft ground beside the road, blocking others. Meanwhile, high above, Jefferson and his wingmen continued to circle, watching the sudden activity below with interest. "Would you look at that?" Townsend commented. "They're scattering like ants from a kicked anthill." "They must be monitoring our frequency," Jefferson replied with satisfaction. "Now for Phase 2. He switched back to the command frequency and continued his fictional communication. "Thunderbird Actual. This is Blue Leader. Be advised, enemy column is dispersing. They appear to be seeking cover in anticipation of airstrike. No, sir. I don't recommend proceeding with the bombing run as planned. Ground attack aircraft would be more effective against dispersed targets." "Roger that. We'll relay to strike packages. Strike packages, this is Blue Leader. New tasking, primary target is now dispersed enemy column. Adjust approach vectors and munitions accordingly. Thunderbird ground elements, begin your advance to blocking positions." Jefferson paused again, then added a final touch. "Roger, Thunderbird. Understand 3 full regiments with armor support are moving into blocking positions south of the enemy column. Estimated time to contact, 1 hour. We'll continue observation and provide updates on enemy movement." On the ground, Heidelmann's signals officer rushed in with the latest intercept. "Sir, the Americans have changed their plans. They're switching from bombers to fighter bombers to target our dispersed vehicles, and they're moving ground forces to cut us off from the south." Heidelmann spread his map on the hood of his vehicle. If American ground forces established blocking positions to the south, while aircraft struck his dispersed units, his entire command could be encircled and destroyed. The mountain pass to the north was still 15 kilometers away, too far to reach before the reported American ground units arrived. "Do we have any confirmation of American ground forces moving in our direction?" he asked his intelligence officer. "No visual confirmation, Herr Oberst. Our last reports indicated American armored units were still at least 30 kilometers south of our position, but those reports are several hours old." Heidelmann faced a commander's nightmare: incomplete information and a rapidly deteriorating situation. If he ordered his force to regroup and continue toward the pass, they would be vulnerable to air attack. If he kept them dispersed, they would be picked off by fighter bombers and possibly surrounded by advancing ground forces. If he ordered a withdrawal to seek better defensive terrain to the south, he would be abandoning his mission to establish blocking positions in the Alpine passes. After a moment of tense consideration, he made his decision. Order a tactical withdrawal to the south, back down the valley for approximately 15 kilometers. There's a defensible position near the river crossing where we can establish a perimeter and regroup. We'll hold there and reassess once we have better intelligence on enemy movements. Sir, that's completely contrary to our orders to establish positions in the northern passes, his operations officer objected. Our orders assumed we would reach those positions intact, Heidelmann replied firmly. That's no longer possible. A fighting withdrawal now is better than complete destruction. Pass the orders. Once again, motorcycle messengers raced along the dispersed column, relaying the new orders. Slowly, the German vehicles began to extract themselves from their hiding positions and reform into columns heading south, away from their original destination and back toward the advancing Allied forces. From his cockpit, Jefferson watched with growing amazement as the German column began to reverse direction. Blue 2 to Blue Leader, are you seeing this? They're turning around. I see it, Jefferson replied, hardly able to believe that his ruse was working so effectively. Let's maintain the deception. Follow my lead. He switched back to the command frequency. Thunderbird Actual, this is Blue Leader. Update on enemy movement. They appear to be conducting a tactical withdrawal to the south. They're reforming their column and moving back down the valley road. Roger that. I'll relay your orders to ground elements. Ground element commanders, be advised, enemy is moving south into your engagement zone. Maintain current positions and prepare to engage when enemy reaches phase line Bravo. After waiting an appropriate time as if receiving acknowledgements, Jefferson added, Blue Flight will continue observation and provide updates on enemy movement and vectors, expecting Strike Package Alpha on station in approximately 10 minutes. The deception was complete. From the German perspective, they were withdrawing from a bomber attack only to move directly into a prepared ambush. What they didn't know was that there were no bombers, no fighter bombers, and no American ground forces in blocking positions. There was only a single flight of 3 P-51 Mustangs and a quick-thinking pilot with a talent for improvisation. As the German column reformed and began moving south, Jefferson realized he needed to report the actual situation to his real command. He switched to the authentic squadron frequency, which was encrypted and not monitored by German intelligence. Blue Leader to Castle Base, priority message. Castle Base receiving. Go ahead, Blue Leader, came the response from the 332nd Operations Center. Castle Base, we've located a major enemy force approximately 20 kilometers north of Pontremoli. Column initially moving north toward Alpine passes, but now reversing direction and moving south. Estimate 200-plus vehicles, including significant armor elements. Roger, Blue Leader. Can you confirm current enemy heading and composition? Enemy is moving south along Route 38 at approximately grid coordinates Mike Romeo 579. Composition includes approximately 40 to 50 tanks or assault guns, numerous half-tracks, artillery pieces, and support vehicles. Column extends approximately 7 kilometers. There was a pause before Castle Base responded. Understood, Blue Leader. Hold your position and continue observation. We're alerting command and requesting attack aircraft to your location. What caused the enemy to reverse direction? Jefferson hesitated, unsure how to explain his unauthorized deception operation. Sir, they appear to have intercepted a transmission and believed they were about to be attacked by our bombers, followed by a ground force interdiction. What transmission? There are no bomber groups assigned to that area today. Sir, I created a fictional radio call to a non-existent unit, hoping they might be monitoring our frequencies. I pretended to be calling in bombers and ground forces. There was a long silence on the radio. Jefferson braced himself for a reprimand or worse. What he had done was completely outside standard operating procedures and could potentially be considered a disciplinary issue. Finally, Castle Base responded. Say again, Blue Leader. Are you telling me you conducted a deception operation on your own initiative? Yes, sir. I apologize for the breach of protocol, but I saw an opportunity to disrupt enemy movement without engaging directly. Another pause, then. Stand by, Blue Leader. The silence stretched for several minutes as Jefferson and his wingmen continued to circle, watching the German column gradually reorient itself southward. Jefferson's stomach tightened. Had he overstepped his authority to the point where he'd face serious consequences? Finally, Castle Base came back on the frequency. "Blue Leader, this is Colonel Davis." Jefferson swallowed hard. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., commander of the 332nd Fighter Group, was now personally on the radio. As the highest-ranking black officer in the United States Army Air Forces and the son of the first black general in the United States Army, Davis was a legendary figure who maintained the highest standards of professionalism and discipline. "Yes, sir," Jefferson responded. "Lieutenant Jefferson, I've been briefed on your unconventional approach to enemy interdiction. While I cannot officially endorse operating outside the chain of command, I must say the results appear promising. Continue observation and maintain your deception if possible. Reinforcements are being scrambled now. Ground forces are being alerted to the potential opportunity." "Thank you, sir. We'll comply." "And Jefferson?" "Yes, sir." "Well done. Davis out." Jefferson felt a wave of relief, followed by renewed determination. Colonel Davis's tacit approval meant everything to him. Now he needed to ensure the deception continued until Allied forces could capitalize on the opportunity. "Blue 2 and 3, Colonel Davis is aware of our situation and approves. Let's continue the operation. I'll maintain the fictional radio calls. You two continue observation and report any changes in enemy movement." For the next 30 minutes, Jefferson continued his one-sided radio conversations, creating an increasingly detailed fictional scenario in which American ground forces were preparing to ambush the German column from concealed positions to the south. He described fictional artillery units setting up, tank companies moving into blocking positions, and additional air support arriving in waves. On the ground, Oberst Heidelmann was receiving increasingly concerning reports from his signals officers, who were monitoring the American transmissions. The picture they painted was grim. His force was apparently moving directly into a prepared killing zone, with American armored units, artillery, and air power, all coordinating to destroy his command. "Herr Oberst, the latest intercepts suggest American forces have established a complete blocking position approximately 8 kilometers ahead of our current position," reported Hauptmann Fischer. "They appear to have at least 2 armored battalions with supporting artillery, and airstrikes are imminent." Heidelmann studied his map again. If these reports were accurate, continuing south would lead to disaster. Yet turning north again would expose his column to the bomber attacks they had initially fled from. Moving east or west off the main road was impossible given the terrain and his vehicle's condition. "How reliable are these intercepts?" he asked his signals officer. "The transmissions are clear, sir. Multiple American units coordinating their positions and attack plans. They seem unaware that we can monitor their communications." Something about the situation bothered Heidelmann. In his experience, American forces were usually more careful about operational security. The level of detail in the radio transmissions, exact unit positions, timing of attacks, even ammunition status, seemed almost too perfect, too convenient. "Is it possible this is a deception?" he asked suddenly. "A deception, sir?" His intelligence officer looked startled. "Yes. What if those fighters circling above are not just observing? What if they're broadcasting false information, knowing we're monitoring their frequencies?" His staff exchanged uncertain glances. "It's possible, sir, but that would be an unusually sophisticated operation for a simple reconnaissance flight." Heidelmann walked outside and looked up again. The 3 American fighters were still there, circling lazily. Just 3 aircraft. If a major American attack was truly imminent, wouldn't there be more air activity? He made another decision. "Halt the column. I want to send reconnaissance teams forward immediately, light vehicles only, with our best scouts. Have them advance 5 kilometers ahead and report back what they actually see, not what the Americans want us to believe we'll see." 3 scout vehicles, motorcycles with sidecars, quickly moved forward past the main column. Meanwhile, the rest of the German force came to a halt, vehicles pulling off to the sides of the road where possible. Above, Jefferson noticed the change. "Blue Leader to Blue 2 and 3. The column has stopped moving. Something's changed." "I see 3 light vehicles moving ahead of the main column," Townsend reported. "Looks like they might be sending out scouts." Jefferson realized his deception might be in danger of unraveling. If those scout vehicles reported back that there were no American forces in blocking positions, the entire German column might reverse direction again. "I need to adapt the scenario," Jefferson said, thinking quickly. He switched back to the command frequency. "Thunderbird Actual, this is Blue Leader. Be advised, enemy column has halted and appears to be sending reconnaissance elements forward. Roger that, I'll relay your orders. All ground units, maintain concealment." I repeat, maintain complete concealment. Do not engage scout elements. Allow them to return to the main column with negative observations. Ground force. Actual confirms ambush will be executed only once main enemy body resumes movement and reaches phase line Charlie. Jefferson hoped this adjustment would account for what the German scouts would see, or rather not see. By suggesting that American forces were deliberately remaining hidden to draw in the main German force, he was attempting to explain away the lack of visible American units that the scouts would report. After 20 tense minutes, the German scout vehicles returned to the main column. Their reports were delivered directly to Oberst Heidelmann, who listened with growing suspicion. "You saw nothing? No American armor, no troop concentrations, no artillery positions?" "Nothing, Herr Oberst," replied the senior scout. "The road is clear for at least 5 kilometers ahead. There are suitable defensive positions near the river crossing, but no sign of enemy activity." Heidelmann considered this information. Either the American forces were exceptionally well concealed, possible, but unlikely given the terrain, or the radio transmissions were indeed a deception operation. "Send the scouts out again," he ordered. "This time go 10 kilometers forward, and send teams to probe our flanks as well. I want to know what's actually out there, not what the Americans want us to think is out there." As the scout vehicles deployed again, Heidelmann considered his dwindling options. Fuel was critically low. His force had enough for perhaps another 50 kilometers of movement at most. Every change of direction, every delay, consumed precious fuel that could not be replaced. If he made the wrong decision now, his entire command could be lost. Jefferson watched the German scouts deploy again and realized his deception was being tested more thoroughly. He needed to adjust his approach. "The German commander is no fool," he said to his wingman. "We need to give him something more convincing." After considering his options, Jefferson made a bold decision. "Blue 2 and 3, I'm going to make a low pass over the column. I want to make them think I'm marking targets for an imminent airstrike. Follow me down but maintain enough altitude to stay above their anti-aircraft fire." "Roger that, Blue Leader," Townsend and Watkins acknowledged, though with audible concern in their voices. Jefferson pushed his control stick forward and began a steep dive toward the German column. As he descended, he activated his radio again. "Strike packages, this is Blue Leader. I am commencing marking run for target designation. Ground elements stand by for fire mission. I'll identify key command vehicles and artillery positions." He leveled off at just 1,000 feet, well within range of German anti-aircraft guns, and made a high-speed pass directly over the length of the column. He did not fire his weapons or drop anything, but the psychological impact of a fighter aircraft suddenly diving toward the column was immediate and dramatic. German soldiers scrambled for cover. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire, sending tracers arcing into the sky but missing the fast-moving Mustang. The appearance of an American fighter at low altitude, apparently marking targets, seemed to confirm the radio transmissions about an imminent attack. Jefferson pulled up sharply after his pass and climbed back to a safer altitude. "That should give them something to think about," he said to his wingmen. Meanwhile, on the ground, Heidelmann was receiving frantic reports about the fighters' low pass over the column. "They're marking targets, Herr Oberst. The attack must be imminent." Heidelmann wasn't so certain. "If an attack was truly imminent, they would have hit us while we're stationary. This feels like pressure, not preparation." Nevertheless, he couldn't ignore the possibility of an impending airstrike. "Order all anti-aircraft units to maintain maximum alert." And where are those scout reports? The tension continued to build over the next 15 minutes until the scouts returned. Their reports were still negative. No sign of American forces in blocking positions, no artillery being set up, no tanks lying in ambush. The road south appeared clear. Heidelmann faced a commander's dilemma. The visual evidence from his scouts suggested the way south was clear, but the radio intercepts and the fighters' marking run suggested otherwise. If he moved south and the American ambush was real, his force would be decimated. If he remained stationary or turned north again, he would be failing in his mission and possibly facing the bomber attack that had initially prompted the withdrawal. After weighing the contradicting information, Heidelmann made his decision. We will resume movement south, but with extreme caution. Advanced guard with all remaining reconnaissance elements, followed by anti-aircraft units, then the main body. Maintain maximum dispersion between vehicles. If we encounter American forces, we will attempt to break through using our remaining armor elements as a spearhead. The German column began to move again, this time with a more cautious, combat-ready formation. Scouts ranged well ahead, and the vehicles maintained greater spacing than before. Jefferson observed the resumption of movement with satisfaction. His deception was still working, even if the German commander was becoming more cautious. Blue Leader to Castle Base. German column is moving south again, now approximately 12 kilometers north of Pontremoli. They appear to be advancing in combat formation. Roger, Blue Leader, came the reply. Be advised, friendly ground forces are now aware of the situation and moving to exploit. The 91st Infantry Division has elements approximately 20 kilometers south of the German column and is preparing blocking positions. Attack aircraft are 15 minutes out from your location. Jefferson felt a surge of excitement. What had begun as an improvised deception was now developing into a genuine opportunity to trap the German force. Real American ground units would soon be in position to intercept the retreating German column. Exactly what he had been pretending was already the case. Blue Flight. Maintain observation and continue the deception. Real help is on the way. 15 minutes until attack aircraft arrive, and friendly ground forces are moving to establish actual blocking positions. For the next 10 minutes, Jefferson continued his fictional radio calls, now trying to buy time for the actual American forces to get into position. He described last-minute adjustments to ambush positions, artillery registration fires, and final preparations for the attack. On the ground, Heidelmann's column continued its cautious advance southward. His scouts had now moved almost 15 kilometers ahead and still reported no sign of American forces. The contradiction between the radio intercepts and visual reconnaissance was becoming more difficult to reconcile. Herr Oberst, said his intelligence officer, I'm beginning to believe the radio transmissions may indeed be a deception. Our scouts report clear roads well beyond where the supposed American blocking positions should be. Heidelmann was considering this assessment when a motorcycle messenger arrived with an urgent report. Dust clouds had been spotted to the south, approximately 10 kilometers away. Large dust clouds consistent with the movement of numerous vehicles. This was the first actual evidence of American forces. The 91st Infantry Division's lead elements were indeed moving to establish blocking positions, just as Jefferson had been describing in his fictional radio transmissions. The fiction was becoming reality. Heidelmann received this news with grim resignation. So there are American forces moving to intercept us after all. The radio transmissions were accurate, even if perhaps they were intended for us to hear. He studied his map once more, looking for alternatives. We cannot continue south and we cannot return north. Our only option is to move west toward these hills and attempt to break contact. New orders were issued, and the German column began yet another change of direction, now attempting to leave the main road and move cross-country toward hills to the west, where they might find defensive terrain and avoid the closing trap. From above, Jefferson watched this new development with interest. Blue Leader to Blue 2 and 3. They're turning west now, trying to escape off-road. This is actually better for us. They'll move slower and consume more fuel. He switched to the real command frequency. Blue Leader to Castle Base. German column is now attempting to move west off the main road, approximately coordinates Mike Romeo 552. They appear to be seeking defensive terrain in the hills. Roger, Blue Leader. Ground forces are being redirected to maintain interception. Attack aircraft are now 5 minutes out. Can you maintain observation? Affirmative, Castle Base. We have sufficient fuel for another 40 minutes on station. The real situation was now developing rapidly. The lead elements of the 91st Infantry Division were indeed moving to establish blocking positions, though not yet where Heidelmann's force could see them. American artillery units were being brought forward to provide fire support. Most significantly, a group of 12 P-47 Thunderbolts was inbound, carrying bombs and rockets specifically for ground attack missions. Jefferson continued his fictional radio calls, now incorporating accurate information about actual American movements. The line between deception and reality was blurring. What had begun as pure fiction was materializing into an actual coordinated attack. On the ground, Heidelmann's force was struggling with the cross-country movement. The recent rains had left the ground soft, and vehicles were becoming bogged down. Fuel consumption increased dramatically as tanks and half-tracks fought through muddy terrain. The column was losing cohesion, stretching out as some vehicles managed better than others. "This is unsustainable," Heidelmann told his staff after receiving reports of the difficulties. "We must find firmer ground or return to the road." Before a new plan could be implemented, a lookout reported aircraft approaching from the south. Many aircraft. The P-47 Thunderbolts had arrived, and unlike Jefferson's lone Mustang making a harmless marking run, these aircraft were armed for ground attack. "Take cover!" The order spread rapidly through the German column. Vehicles that could move sought whatever concealment was available. Anti-aircraft guns traversed to face the new threat. The first wave of Thunderbolts began their attack runs, focusing on vehicles at the head and tail of the column to prevent escape in either direction. Bombs and rockets struck with devastating effect, destroying several tanks and blocking the narrow track the Germans had been following. Jefferson watched the attack from a safe distance, circling at high altitude with his wingmen. "Blue Leader to Castle Base. Attack aircraft have begun their strikes. Enemy column is largely immobilized in open terrain west of the main road." "Roger, Blue Leader. Ground forces report they are now in position to complete encirclement from the south. Artillery beginning preparatory fires." The sound of distant artillery could soon be heard, as American 105mm howitzers began firing on pre-registered coordinates. Shell bursts appeared around the perimeter of the German position, gradually walking inward. For Oberst Heidelmann, the situation had become catastrophic. His force was caught in open terrain under air attack, with artillery fire beginning to fall and ground forces closing from the south. The trap that he had initially feared, then doubted, and then tried to evade had become reality. "Signal officer, prepare white flags," he ordered quietly, "and bring me the radio. It's time to prevent further loss of life." Heidelmann personally made the radio call, breaking his own orders for radio silence. "To American forces, this is Oberst Werner Heidelmann, commanding Kampfgruppe Heidelmann. I request ceasefire to discuss surrender terms." The message was received by American forces and relayed to the attack aircraft and artillery units. The firing gradually stopped as the surrender request was verified. Jefferson heard the ceasefire order over his radio. "All air units, cease attack operations. Enemy commander has requested surrender parley. Maintain positions and stand by." From his altitude, Jefferson could see the German vehicles stopping their movements. White flags began to appear, visible even from his position high above. "They're surrendering," he said, almost in disbelief. "They're actually surrendering." What Jefferson had started as a simple deception, a bluff with no real forces behind it, had evolved into a coordinated operation resulting in the capture of an entire German battle group. His quick thinking and initiative had set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately save lives on both sides and accelerate the Allied advance in northern Italy. Later that afternoon, as American ground forces secured the surrender of Kampfgruppe Heidelmann, Jefferson and his wingmen were ordered to return to base. Their fuel was running low after nearly 2 hours on station. As they turned their P-51s toward home, Jefferson reflected on the extraordinary sequence of events. What had begun as a routine reconnaissance mission had turned into something far more significant. By understanding the psychological aspects of warfare and applying his technical knowledge of radio communications, he had achieved what might have otherwise required a major battle. Unknown to Jefferson at that moment, his actions would have far-reaching consequences. The capture of Kampfgruppe Heidelmann removed a significant obstacle to the Allied advance toward the Alpine passes. More importantly, the intelligence gathered from the captured German officers and documents provided crucial insights into German defensive plans, accelerating the Allied campaign in northern Italy by an estimated 2 weeks. Upon landing at their base near Ramitelli, Italy, Jefferson and his wingmen were immediately summoned to group headquarters. They found not only Colonel Davis waiting for them, but also several senior officers from Fifth Army headquarters. "Lieutenant Jefferson," Colonel Davis began formally, "I've been briefed on your actions today. While I must note that initiating a deception operation without authorization falls outside normal protocols, I cannot argue with the results. You and your flight have demonstrated exceptional initiative and tactical awareness." A brigadier general from Fifth Army stepped forward. "Lieutenant, preliminary reports indicate that your actions directly contributed to the capture of a significant enemy force, over 4,000 troops and approximately 200 vehicles, including 47 tanks and self-propelled guns. Most importantly, you accomplished this with minimal casualties on either side." Jefferson stood at attention, still processing the scale of what had occurred. "Thank you, sir. I was simply trying to disrupt their movement until proper forces could be brought to bear." "Well, your simple disruption evolved into one of the most successful tactical deceptions I've seen in this campaign," the general replied. "I've recommended you for the Distinguished Flying Cross and your wingmen for air medals. The recommendation has already been approved." Colonel Davis added, "Your actions reflect the highest traditions of the 332nd Fighter Group and the Army Air Forces. You've demonstrated that victory can be achieved through intelligence and initiative, not just firepower." After the debriefing, Jefferson was finally able to get some rest. As he lay on his cot in the officers' quarters, he reflected on the day's events and their significance. As an African-American officer, he had faced discrimination and doubt throughout his military career. Many still questioned whether black pilots could perform as effectively as their white counterparts, despite the 332nd's impressive combat record. What he had accomplished today transcended those racial barriers. His actions had been evaluated on their merits and recognized accordingly. It was a small but significant step toward the equal treatment that he and his fellow Tuskegee airmen deserved. The next morning, Jefferson was surprised to receive a visitor, Oberst Werner Heidelmann, now a prisoner of war, who had specifically requested to meet the pilot who had orchestrated the deception that led to his surrender. Under guard, the German officer was brought to a tent where Jefferson waited. The two men, adversaries just a day before, studied each other with professional curiosity. "Lieutenant Jefferson," Heidelmann began in accented but fluent English, "I requested this meeting to satisfy my professional curiosity. Was it really just 3 aircraft conducting that entire deception operation?" Jefferson nodded. "Yes, Oberst Heidelmann. Just my flight of 3 Mustangs. The actual coordination with ground forces came later, after we reported your column's movement." Heidelmann shook his head in a mixture of admiration and chagrin. "Remarkable. You must know that we intercepted all those radio calls, the fictional bomber groups, the supposed ground forces in blocking positions. Very convincing." "That was the intention," Jefferson replied. "What made you think of such an approach? Most pilots would have simply reported our position and waited for bombers to arrive." Jefferson considered the question. "I studied electrical engineering before the war. I understood how radio communication works and how it can be monitored. I also saw an opportunity to achieve our objective without unnecessary bloodshed." Heidelmann nodded slowly. "Psychological warfare at its finest. You played on our fears and expectations perfectly." He paused, then added, "You know, Lieutenant, in another time and place, we might have had much to discuss as professional soldiers. War creates strange circumstances." "It does," Jefferson agreed. "If I may ask, when did you begin to suspect it might be a deception?" "Almost immediately," Heidelmann admitted, "but the possibility that it was accurate could not be ignored. A commander must consider all information, even that which seems questionable. When your single aircraft made that low marking pass, I became more suspicious. It seemed theatrical. But then, when our scouts reported actual American movements to the south, well, your fiction became fact." Sometimes reality catches up with imagination, Jefferson said. As Heidelman was led away, he turned back briefly. Lieutenant, a final professional courtesy. Your tactic, using our own intelligence gathering against us, was brilliant. I would not be surprised if it is studied in military academies someday. In the days that followed, the significance of Jefferson's improvised operation became increasingly apparent. The capture of Kampfgruppe Heidelmann had created a gap in the German defensive line that Allied forces quickly exploited. The advance toward the Alpine passes accelerated, with several key positions captured before they could be properly defended. Military intelligence analysts debriefed Jefferson extensively, documenting his techniques for possible use in future operations. His approach, using the enemy's own intelligence-gathering capabilities against them, represented an innovative form of psychological warfare that minimized casualties while maximizing tactical advantage. On May 4, 1945, just 11 days after Jefferson's deception operation, all German forces in Italy surrendered unconditionally. While many factors contributed to this outcome, the rapid collapse of German defenses in the Po Valley and Alpine approaches, accelerated by the capture of Kampfgruppe Heidelmann, played a significant role in convincing German commanders that further resistance was futile. For First Lieutenant Marcus Jefferson, the Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony held particular significance. Colonel Davis personally pinned the medal to his uniform, with several high-ranking officers from Fifth Army headquarters in attendance. Lieutenant Jefferson, the citation read, distinguished himself by extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight as a pilot of a P-51 fighter aircraft over northern Italy on 23 April 1945. Through exceptional tactical innovation and skilled execution of an unauthorized but highly effective deception operation, Lieutenant Jefferson directly contributed to the surrender of a significant enemy force, resulting in the capture of approximately 4,000 enemy personnel and 200 vehicles, while minimizing casualties on both sides. His actions accelerated the Allied advance in northern Italy and demonstrated exceptional initiative and tactical awareness. The professional competence, aerial skill, and devotion to duty displayed by Lieutenant Jefferson reflect great credit upon himself and the Army Air Forces. After the ceremony, Colonel Davis took Jefferson aside for a private word. Jefferson, what you accomplished goes beyond a single tactical success. You've demonstrated something that many still need to learn, that intelligence and innovation can sometimes accomplish what mere firepower cannot, and that the color of a man's skin has nothing to do with his abilities as an officer and a pilot. Thank you, sir, Jefferson replied. I just did what seemed necessary at the time. That's what makes it remarkable, Davis said. You saw beyond the standard procedures and recognized an opportunity. That kind of thinking wins wars and saves lives. The story of Jefferson's deception operation spread quickly through Allied forces in Italy. It was featured in Stars and Stripes and reported back to the United States, where it gained attention as an example of the contributions being made by African American servicemen despite the discrimination they faced. For Jefferson personally, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of education, initiative, and creative thinking. His background in electrical engineering had given him insights that proved tactically valuable. His willingness to think beyond standard procedures had created an opportunity where none seemed to exist. After the war, Jefferson would complete his engineering degree and become one of the first African American executives at a major electronics corporation. He often credited his wartime experience, particularly the radio deception incident as he came to call it, with teaching him the value of unconventional approaches to problem solving. The tactical lessons from Jefferson's operation were incorporated into Air Force training materials, though often without attribution to him specifically. The concept of using an adversary's intelligence-gathering capabilities against them, creating false expectations that influence decision-making, became a standard element in psychological warfare doctrine. For Oberst Werner Heidelmann, the war's end brought a relatively brief period as a prisoner of war before he was repatriated to Germany in 1947. He later wrote a monograph on psychological warfare that included an analysis of the Mustang deception, as he termed it, citing it as a perfect example of how a minimal force could achieve maximal effect through understanding an opponent's decision-making process. Perhaps the most significant legacy of Jefferson's action was how it demonstrated the contributions that African American servicemen could make when given the opportunity. The success of the 332nd Fighter Group, exemplified by pilots like Jefferson, helped pave the way for the desegregation of the United States military in 1948. Years later, at a reunion of Tuskegee Airmen in 1975, Jefferson, now a successful business executive, was asked about the incident by a young Air Force officer researching the history of psychological warfare. "What made you think of using radio deception instead of just following standard procedure?" the officer asked. Jefferson considered the question carefully before responding. "I think it was partly my technical background, understanding how the Germans would be monitoring our frequencies, but more importantly, it was about seeing the whole picture. I didn't just see enemy vehicles to be destroyed. I saw human beings making decisions based on limited information. Once you understand that, you can sometimes influence those decisions without firing a shot. And the improvisation aspect? Going outside standard procedures?" Jefferson smiled. "As a black pilot in 1945, I was already operating outside what many considered standard. Perhaps that made it easier to think beyond conventional approaches." He paused, then added, "The lesson I took from that day was that initiative and innovative thinking can sometimes accomplish what mere firepower cannot. That's true in war, and it's true in peace." The radio deception incident eventually found its place in military history as an example of how understanding human psychology can be as important as understanding weapons and tactics. It demonstrated that warfare is ultimately about influencing human decisions, not just destroying equipment or occupying territory. For Marcus Jefferson, the incident remained a defining moment in his life, a time when quick thinking, technical knowledge, and moral consideration came together to create an outcome that saved lives on both sides while still achieving military objectives. It represented warfare at its most intelligent and, in a way, most humane, using understanding rather than just force to accomplish a mission. In the final analysis, what Jefferson achieved that April day in 1945 was not just a tactical victory, but a demonstration of the potential for human ingenuity to find better solutions even in the midst of conflict. By understanding how information shapes perception and how perception shapes decisions, he found a way to influence events that minimized suffering while still serving his country effectively. That legacy of intelligence applied to reduce harm while still achieving necessary goals is perhaps the most valuable lesson from this remarkable incident in the closing days of World War II in Europe. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.